Hi everyone, it's Ren here, and today I will be making a return to the question of open monism and more specifically open metaphysics by approaching the topic of the structure of being, which will be the third aspect of being, which will be discussed as part of open metaphysics. And once that is done, I think that we will be approaching towards not the end, but tentatively speaking, maybe the closure of the open metaphysics chapter, because it has been a while, and it might be good to move on, towards other topics in the open monistic canon. I'm thinking in particular about the question of the self, the question of knowledge, the question of morals, the question of all these different things, which I have tackled in my writing to I think an extent that should allow me to talk about it. But maybe let's continue with open metaphysics for now, with the question of the structuring of being. So as you remember, being has three aspects: the aspect of reality, the aspect of content, and the aspect of structure. Content being immanence, having the depth of immanence, and structure having the depth of open-groundedness. So I'll just be talking a little bit in this video about what exactly I mean by the structure of being as open-grounded. Well, basically, if you take the content of being is facts, right? Facts are essentially instances of the possibility of it taking place. And the realization of it taking place is an event. That's what we witness in the world. In fact, in the world, it may be legitimately asked whether we witness events, or rather whether we witness concatenations of events at all times. So, for example, you remember that bottle at this point. This is not like I could say in ordinary language. Well, this is an event. My grabbing the bottle and touching it, or drinking from the bottle, but that's ordinary language speak. In the terminology of open monism, this is rather what we would call a situation, right? So it's a state of affairs, or a complex state of affairs, where a lot of different events, a lot of different realizations of instances of taking place are being reported on by myself in this case. So the content of being, all that you see here, is a manifestation of that content. But it is also structured in an open-grounded manner. And this is what we're going to look at in more detail in this video, okay? So, what is the open ground? Well, you remember from like way early on in this series that the open ground is this concept, which is a kind of a synthetic whole, which combines together the concept of ground, the concept of openness, and the concept of opening. So altogether, that unifies, a synthesis called open-groundedness, which I call ouverture in French. I sometimes use that term in my writing. I prefer the term. I just find it like maybe a bit outlandish for people who are not like French speakers. But let it always be clear that open-groundedness and ouverture mean the same thing. So it simply means the quality of a particular expansive ground to be open to the givenness of factuality. And you might think, what is the givenness of factuality? Well, as you remember, givenness is one of the attributes of immanence, and I gave a lot of different examples of how it played out in the in the open metaphysical system. Well, openness, givenness of factuality is really that, givenness in its sort of purest form is a givenness of facts, since facts are the most basic elements, unbreakable basic elements of immanent space, right? So the givenness or the giving of facts is what the structure of any combination of such facts is open to, right? It's I mean, in a sense, a fact, right? A fact is not really such that it could be called structured open-groundedly, because it doesn't really have to be structured. It is an unbreakable whole. It doesn't really have parts. If I were to use like an analogy from meteorology, the fact that wholes are composed of parts. Well, sometimes a whole is just itself. It doesn't really have parts if it is undifferentiated, and a fact as a virtual instance of taking place is undifferentiated. It does not have parts. In a sense, it is not structured. What is structured across virtual space, across virtual immanent space, what is structured is unities of facts. So instead of factual units, which are themselves just facts and they're not structured as such, they just are, factual unities are and also are structured in an open-grounded manner, which means that on top of being grounded and on top of being what they are, having a certain makeup, virtual, like if we speak about the virtual level, they have a certain virtual makeup, which gives itself in reality as the grounds that we have discussed in the past. My life ground, the ground of anything really that is in the world. But those grounds are openings insofar as they are open to the givenness of factuality, meaning that they are open to new facts, which give the movements of a factual bundle or factual world in virtual space, but also translated into any the life of a human being, or the persistence of a particular, what we call a particular object, what I prefer calling a particular thing, the becoming of it, the persistence of it, it suggests that there is a constant givenness of its factuality, or an openness of the ground of that object to the givenness of factuality. But you can easily imagine that this particular thing's openness to factuality takes a slightly different form than my own openness to factuality. Like, the openness of this bottle to factuality is a lot more regimented, a lot more limited. It is not to say that it is like necessarily completely bound by necessity, but whatever happens to it is kind of, because it does not have will, which suggests another distinction between beings and things. Things are what is without a will, and beings is what is with a will. What is with an open will is a higher order being. What is with a will that is not open is a first order being. But in any case, the openness to factuality of a thing is going to be different than the openness to factuality of, say, a higher order being, like human being, of which I am a representative. So it's going to be a lot less easy to predict what I'm going to be doing in the next 10 seconds than it is to predict what is going to happen to the bottle. You don't say what the bottle is going to be doing because the bottle has no will, so you cannot say what the bottle is going to be doing. But things might happen to the bottle. They will actually not be the product of the will of the bottle itself, but still it will be subjected to various things. So its ground will still be subjected to things. So there is still a form of openness to factuality. but it takes a different form than my own openness to factuality. And if you take, for example, an animal like a cat, its openness to factuality will be different than that of the bottle. There will be an openness to factuality of a slightly more diverse kind, but it will not be quite as diverse as openness to factuality as of a higher order kind, like my own openness, because my own openness is second degree recursive, which means that in my life there is a certain repetition of what happens to me, right? I mean, like, I do wake up in the morning, I do have breakfast, I do go to work. Like, there's not like absolute and complete newness to absolutely everything that I do in my life. There is a repetition. Undoubtedly, there is repetition, and that has to be acknowledged. It's part of the ground, and it's part of the fact that, if you like, the givenness is never like completely random, which suggests things about contingency within bounds. You know, there's not complete like submission to necessity, but there are still bounds to the way in which givenness gives what we are open to, whether as higher order beings, whether as things, whether as first order beings. All the actual existence in the world are open to something, and that is what they have in common. The aspect of being a structure which links everything. It survives, so to speak, orders of virtuality and actuality. The order of actuality is the acting out of the way in which we are structured virtually, right? We all share that open-grounded structure, whether we are beings of the two different kinds or whether we are things. So, if you like, that open-grounded structure is pervasive. It's not transcendental, it's simply immanent. Everything is open-grounded, and that's all it is. So, the fact that that structure is immanent and prevalent is, if you like, it suggests that it is not sufficient to explain why there are different beings, beings of different kinds. It doesn't explain the sort of distinction between singularity and individuality, or what we call individuation, because structure is shared in every sense. The way in which difference will be performed or will take place has to do more with givenness and recursiveness, which are attributes of immanence, which I discussed in my previous video. But still, try to remember that the very nature of everything that is, right, is that it is content, the content of being, that it is real, and that it is, insofar as it is it sort of is organized into a unity of facts realized as events in the actual world. It is structured open-groundedly, whether it is something that is completely inanimate or whether it is something that is animate or even endowed with consciousness or self-consciousness. And the difference between beings, because obviously there are differences, is not really due to actually their structuring. Like, I do sometimes speak in my writing about like an opening in the outer circle of a disc, of a ground, etc., etc. And I mean, this analogy is useful, but always keep in mind it's only an analogy supposed to capture something that is deeper but also more ineffable about the nature of being and beings. Fundamentally, open-grounded structure is present, immanent, it's across the board. What leads to the manifestation of different orders of being in reality as we perceive them, since this is where we are, has to do with the way in which the open-groundedness of a particular thing or being is open either to, simply recursive givenness, to second degree givenness, or to a form of givenness that is sort of recursive neutral, like in the life of or in the existence of things. Basically, what things are purely actual in the sense, like everything that happens to them just happens to them. But maybe I will go into a bit more detail about that in the next video if I get questions from you guys, or depending on what you guys' reaction is to this. If you think this is enough to sort of have as an introduction to open grounded structure, maybe I'll stay there and I'll discuss like another topic in my next video. But if you have questions, or if I realize that there are aspects that I have not discussed, I will do so in my next video. So I hope you have had a good time listening to me, and I'll see you next time, guys. Bye.